Today we're going to start a video series looking at early ACL rehab. I can't overstate how important it is that we do our work really well in the first 1 to 2 weeks. If we set the stage and do a really great job in those first couple weeks, the rest of the ACL rehab tends to go really well. If we struggle up front and don't do a lot of great work in those first couple of weeks, I find that the rest of the program is kind of a struggle. So we're going to take some time, look at what the first couple of weeks really should involve. I've got 5 basic goals for those first 1 to 2 weeks. Number 1 is reduce pain. Number 2 is reduce effusion. Those are both simple, right? Number 3 is addressing hypertonic tissue, which is important we get after. Number 4 would be to improve proximal stability. And then the 5th thing, if we've done the other 4, is really easy, and that is increase range of motion. So in the next videos, we're going to look at what are the actual things that we're going to do to improve all those goals. So I've basically got 10 things that I'm going to look to do, that I'm going to suggest that you integrate these first 2 weeks of your ACL rehab. First one is going to be breathing, diaphragmatic breathing. We'll get after that here in a second. Next one will be patellar mobilization, instrument-assisted soft tissue mobilization. We'll talk about what that looks like. The next one is going to be an extension mob or a stretch to really look at that terminal extension that's so important we get up front. We're also going to look at knee flexion and how we can address that up front and how important that is. Then we're going to start to get into some actual exercises. A leg lowering progression that I love. We're going to look at bridging, we're going to look at marching, we're going to look at gait training, and finally the 10th item is we're going to start with our Turkish get-up progression. So in the next videos we're going to start to break down what does each one of these look like for the post-op ACL, because it is so important we address all these areas in those first 1 to 2 weeks. So immediately the day after surgery, I want to get in on soft tissue. So I'm going to immediately start to look at those incisions, and I'm going to start to move that tissue around in that area. Real light touch, I don't want to break anything open, but there's nothing wrong with just moving the tissue around those incisions to prevent any scarring from happening, and I'm going to do that for the first few weeks so I don't get those layers stuck together. I also want to immediately start with patellar mobs, working both medial lateral and superior inferior with those patellar mobs to make sure that patella doesn't get stuck where it is. And then I'm also going to do a lot of work with my instrument-assisted soft tissue tools, where I'm going to upregulate and downregulate specific areas based on what I see with that patient. Hypertonic tissue, which happens a lot after surgery, is a big time pain generator. So make sure we're addressing all this soft tissue so we don't run into that cycle. The area with regards to range of motion I think is most important early on is extension. Flexion I always feel like I can get down the road if I need to, but extension is so important because if I don't get it early on, it's an uphill battle. So we can do several different ways. We can do an extension mob, which I'm not going to demonstrate today. The simple way we can really get after this and people can do on their own is a simple extension stretch, where basically we want to put their leg or heel up on a pillow or a prop, and the whole goal is to get rid of this space right here. Then we take a band or a towel, something like that, a rope. I want to sit up tall, pull back and lean forward at the exact same time, and I'm going to feel a great stretch right here. Really making sure that posterior capsule doesn't lock down on us. I hold that about 5 seconds, then I'm going to repeat that 10, 15, maybe 20 times, once or twice a day. Really helps ensure we keep that extension post-operatively. So I'm going to take that hip into flexion until I find a position where they can really start to relax that psoas starts to let go. So typically you're going to hang out here for around 90 seconds. That's kind of the magic number, what the research is telling us right now, for working on a muscle to change some of that neurological tone. So I'm going to hang out here until I really feel that leg go dead. And then I'm just going to start to work on a little bit of knee flexion with them. And they're going to tell me when I need to stop, basically with their facial expressions and a little bit of guarding. But what I find is if I just nice, easy start to take them through this range of motion, I can gain a lot of motion a lot more quickly than I could with some of the other traditional methods that most of us learned in school. And I think that's really just because they're able to relax and let that leg go. One thing that I have to do early on is control pain after an ACL. So my easiest way of controlling pain without a lot of pain meds is diaphragmatic breathing. It's the best way I can turn off the sympathetic response. So I want to give people supine. I'm going to work through a progression. So I'm going to have them start here, knees bent, feet flat, or even elevated. And they're just going to work on expanding through their diaphragm. In on a 4 count, out on a 6 count, in through the nose, out through their mouth. Once they can do this kind of anteriorly well, then I'm going to put a couple of fingers between a couple of ribs and have them work on expanding laterally. And then I'm also going to eventually go, so my hands are behind my low back, so they have to expand posteriorly. So I'm really working on that entire canister, expanding in all directions. But the great thing is, once I've done that, I've taught them how to improve that proximal control, that proximal stability. It pays off dividends down the road, but also gives them a lot of control over their pain. Another exercise I really like to focus on for early ACL rehab is the bridge and the bridging progression. If I can get them to bend that knee and get to a core engaged bridge with their knees bent, that's my goal. But early on, I'm not going to be able to do that, so I may have to go with a straight leg version. But the whole goal here is proximal stability. Get the glutes, get that core and trunk really working for us. So the goal would be to get to a core engaged bridge where I've got a band here, arms down, bridge here. But obviously I may not have that much knee flexion, so we can modify it by starting with feet up on a box or even a foam roll, and we bridge here to start with, and then eventually we can go a little bit of knee bend, and then eventually get to more knee flexion. That way we can progress into that bridge, and I can do some bridging very early on in their rehab. Another one of my favorite exercises early on after an ACL is leg lowering. Now, a lot of people really like to do a straight leg raise. I'm not necessarily against that. I'm not necessarily for it. But I will say this, if you're gonna do a leg raise, I would prefer you start from the top down with this leg lowering progression that I'm gonna show you here. It really loads the core up so we get some proximal stability. It also puts them at a mechanical advantage with their leg over their hip, and motor learning takes place better from the top down than the bottom up. So I'm going to have them supine. You can do this on the table, you can do it on the floor, and I'm going to use a band so I load the core. And I can just go one leg, or I can go both legs if I want, but arms down, lower the leg, maybe just in their available range, and then we go here again. So arms always starting in the movements, and eventually we're going to work all the way down. I can spot them if needed because I'm going to do this basically the day after surgery. So early on they're going to need some help. But if you reverse engineer that and go from the top down, you're going to find when you try to go bottom up, they're going to do a whole lot better. One of my favorite movements, you guys have heard me talk about this before, is a core engaged march. And I'm going to do this early with my ACL rehab as well. Basically because it allows me to start to look into timing and sequencing. So we're going to load the core, then I'm going to lift the leg back down, and then I'm loaded here. I will do this within a day or two after an ACL. And I like it because it gives them a lifeline. We can start to introduce some single leg balance. Also is going to allow them to actively work on that knee flexion, which we're looking for, that range of motion. So even if they only get to here and they can only flex this much, that's fine. And then we're going to progress till we eventually get to a full march that is really nice and comfortable for them. Early and often we go with this march. Another really important movement early on in ACL rehab is looking at the hip hinge. So I can start them off in the first couple of days really easy, put them in a chair or a box. I can vary this height, which is going to give me various degrees of hip flexion. And then a little bit of knee bend, kettlebell between my legs, back flat. I'm going to hip hinge down, grab that kettlebell, stand up or sit up, and then back down, keeping that back flat. So I'm just introducing this hip hinge early on. And then as we get more into like week 2, where they're a little more steady on their feet, I can go ahead, get them upright, get them set. I load them up with like a light sandbag, and we start to introduce hip hinge in a standing position. That's a little bit more advanced, but either way, I really encourage you start to introduce this hip hinge progression early and often in your ACL rehab. Within those first couple weeks after the ACL reconstruction, I do like to start with some half get-up progressions. We don't have to use a load. I'm going to use a small kettlebell today, but just getting them to start to move, it's a full integration exercise, which is why it's so good. Plus, especially on this leg, I don't have to have any knee flexion as I start to progress through this. So we can start to work very early on. So I'm just going to work a half progression. So one leg straight, one leg bent, kettlebell up in front. I'm going to roll, come up onto that elbow, and I can start here or stop there, or I can go all the way to the hand and then come back here. I can start and stop anywhere in that progression, but in this situation, very safe environment. I can keep this knee more straight if I need to, if that's my involved leg, but I want to start to integrate so people start to get used to using this Turkish get-up, because I'm going to use it later on in their rehab process. Of course, walking, gait training is really imperative early on in our ACL rehab, so we get people back to their ADLs. So I like to start real simply, just some sort of a low object they have to clear. This is just a box. And I'm going to stand right next to it. This is my affected leg, so this is the one I had surgery on. What they're going to do is pick their toe up, strike their heel, squeeze their quad, do a nice quad set, then pick that leg back up, clear it, touch their toe, clear it. So now they have to start to get used to actually bending that knee, bending the hip. And then after we've done multiple reps there and they're really comfortable with that, then it's just a matter of doing the same thing, quad set, move over top of the foot. Same thing here, move over top of the foot, and we start to move with it. Work on that so we get their gait restored. Faster we do that, the faster they get feeling better and moving better throughout their day.